Good afternoon, everyone, and might I extend a warm welcome to all of those attending here this evening or this afternoon, both in the distillery building and also to those of you attending online. And many thanks for joining in. Today, we mark the 2022 Human Rights Award. And in doing so, we place a focus on the mental health of travellers. The human rights imperative that exists in giving full expression to the dignity that it means to be a citizen of Ireland and a traveller citizen of Ireland. We will shortly hear from Aoife O'Leary, Chair of the Bar of Ireland Human Rights Committee, on why the National Traveller Mental Health Network was chosen and recommended to Council for this award this evening. And then Mags Casey from the network will deliver her remarks. But firstly, I thought I might share some thoughts with you myself, and if you'll bear with me and allow me to do that. In the traveller playwright Rosaleen MacDonagh's book, Unsettled, there's a scene in a house which brings with it a degree of tension. And I'm just going to quote, "Later, over breakfast, Helen warned the two of us that we need to stop the identity politics. Traveller ethnicity should be a celebration for all of us in this house, not just you," she said. And since 2017, when traveller ethnicity was first formally recognised in this country, I think it's evident that it has not been fully celebrated. And I mean celebrated in the sense of equitable access to services, adequate resourcing of community and health support, and education and the provision of accommodation. And I think the statistics are stark, and Mags will, I no doubt, set them out based on her own personal experience, as well as the experience of the wider traveller community. I think it's a shocking indictment of our celebration that the last comprehensive all-Ireland study of traveller health and demographics was in 2008. And this was based on a Department of Health recommendation dating from 2002. Might I ask, what section of the settled community would actually accept the paucity of data that shapes a policy for the 2020s? Traveller health and mental health within that, I think, must be seen as a justice issue. In fact, I think it's just injustice heaped on injustice. Firstly, there's the inequality of services that give rise to mental anguish within the traveller community. And then there's the accessing of services once that mental anguish has actually been identified. And in his textbook, Social Inclusion and the Legal System, Public Interest Law in Ireland, Professor Jerry White actually dedicates an entire chapter to the issue of public interest law and traveller rights. And I think it's interesting to note that the key cases that have, I suppose, developed and defined traveller campaigns for equity and entitlement to enjoy socioeconomic rights are broadly characterised thus far by cases involving the provision of traveller accommodation and discrimination cases, largely against local authorities, that have been taken under the Equal Status Acts. Health and mental health figures little, if at all. And Professor White notes that the first explicit statutory reference to travellers in modern legislation occurs in just a marginal note to Section 13 of the Housing Act 1988. And I think how degrading it is that the initial characterisation of travellers was in economic terms, born from the 1963 Commission on Itinerancy. And the policy response to that was assimilation and settled housing. Unfortunately, it took until 1995 for the report of the Task Force on the Travelling Community to recognise the distinct culture and identity of travellers. And the legislation between 1995 and 2000 framed travellers in vague and unidentified terms. It wasn't until the Equal Status Act of 2000 that our legislature had the confidence and the insight to recognise the traveller community as, and again I'm going to quote, the community of people who are commonly called travellers and who are identified, both by themselves and others, as people with a shared history, culture and traditions, including historically a nomadic way of life on the island of Ireland. In terms of those socioeconomic rights, there is a contest on the one hand between the courts, who seek to uphold explicit and implicit rights, and to seek out and guard against social inclusion. And on the other hand, the role of the state or the government in delivering on policy and resources. It's through cases such as O'Reilly and Limerick Corporation, O'Brien and Wicklow UDC, Limerick v Ryan and others. And unfortunately, I think access to health services and mental health services has still to be litigated. But I think Mags will allude to in due course, mental health is not isolated from other conditions of dignity. Those conditions such as housing, right to education, respect and dignity, employment, arts, culture, and confident expression. Our Constitution, together with the European Convention on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, various European directives, our own domestic legislation, prohibits racial and ethnic discrimination in accessing services. And this legislation and the conventions are tools that we as lawyers and travellers as citizens both enjoy. Indeed, Professor White comments that the value of litigation and legal casework is that apart from the procedural and substantive relief that it brings about or it may result in, the principal value lies in the fact that it can require our and the political system to begin to address the issues of social exclusion that would otherwise be ignored. And as part of the continued development of the Human Rights Award, we look forward to working with you, Mags, and your network on some of your priorities, both through our Human Rights Committee and through the voluntary auspices or the auspices of our voluntary assistance scheme. I think the mental health experience of the travelling community is upsetting to hear. And it's challenging to understand the human burden and the trauma that it must represent. I think for us, it should serve as a rallying cry, an urgency to those in the rest of society to bring to the table what we can in assisting to ease this burden. And I think the matter of mental health and traveller mental health is something we all have a stake in. This award goes to the network, I think, as a model of community action and deliberation. And I know that there are many who are not here with us today, those who've been victims of an environment which has been ignored and under-resourced by the state, those who've sat around tables, in groups, at talks, those who've petitioned, canvassed and demonstrated. And this award seeks to acknowledge that work and all of that work of those individuals and groups, and that we can acknowledge and let you know that that work has not gone unheeded. Before I finish, just to return to Rosaline's Unsettled, I think how we are marked as a society in respect of the advances we make. And there have been many of those advances in the recent past. For example, the marriage equality referendum. Those advances can be seen in the changes to the law, the policy, and the culture of our country. And I think that celebration and expression of equality has to be met by leadership, resourcing, and cooperation. And the changes in the law, the policy, and the culture relating to travellers is no different than it relates to the rest of the citizens of Ireland. So I think congratulations once more to the National Traveller Mental Health Network, the recipient of the Bar of Ireland Human Rights Award for 2022. We witnessed your campaign and your fight, and we acknowledge that we have a role to play to assist you in the future. Thank you very much.
The Human Rights Committee of the Bar of Ireland is committed to promoting justice and respect for human rights through the rule of law. A key objective of the committee is to engage with human rights groups and to coordinate the annual Human Rights Award presented on behalf of the Bar of Ireland. The Human Rights Award is an annual award made to individuals or organisations who have made a unique contribution to the advancement of human rights. Last year's recipient was Masai, a grassroots movement advocating on behalf of asylum seekers in Ireland. Previous recipients include Dr. Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization, Catherine Corliss for her work relating to the Tuam Mother and Babies homes, and the Irish Naval Service for their work in rescuing migrants in the Mediterranean. This year, the committee agreed that the theme for the award would be traveller rights. This meant that the recipient would be an organisation or an individual who has demonstrated their commitment to promoting human rights within the traveller community. Following an extensive research process, the committee was ultimately very pleased to choose the National Traveller Mental Health Network as the recipient of the Bar of Ireland's Human Rights Award for 2022. It is well recognised that travellers are one of the most marginalised groups in Irish society. Just a few months ago, the difficulties the traveller community face was acknowledged in a judgment of the Irish Supreme Court concerning housing and evictions. And Mr. Justice Hogan in Clare County Council versus McDonough said, the Irish traveller community still remains a vulnerable minority at the margins of Irish society. The members of that community have struggled for recognition of their own cultural identity and way of life. It's not surprising that such marginalisation would have an extremely negative impact on the mental health of the members of the travelling community, but the scale of the issue is truly shocking. In 2010, the report referenced by Sarah earlier, commissioned on behalf of the Department of Health and Children in Ireland, the Department of Health, Social Services and Public Safety in Northern Ireland and the HSE, commissioned an All-Ireland Traveller Health Study. And the report details that at that time, the suicide rate in male travellers was statistically significant, being 6.6 times higher than the general population. The authors also detailed that the female suicide rate is higher than in the general population. Pavi Point has stated that there are barriers to travellers accessing mental health services and obtaining the correct treatment, including as a result of discrimination and racism, a lack of culturally appropriate service providers, and the social and cultural stigma attached to accessing such services. While there has been some limited progress in recent years in terms of the acknowledgement of the traveller community as a distinct ethnic group by then Taoiseach Enda Kenny in 2017, and the fact that membership of the traveller community is a protected ground of discrimination under the Equal Status Acts, notwithstanding these developments, the mental health difficulties that travellers face are real and stark. In 2021, an Oireachtas committee heard that 11% of travellers in Ireland die by suicide. Such loss of life is unconscionable. The National Traveller Mental Health Network was established in 2018 and officially launched in 2019. They are, in their own words, a collective of travellers and traveller organisations across Ireland whose goal is to develop a collective space that is traveller-led, where local, regional and national traveller mental health issues are highlighted, discussed and addressed. A space where solutions are explored with the view to being included in culturally appropriate policy on traveller mental health. The network states that it seeks to achieve that objective in a number of ways, which include ensuring the network is led by members of the traveller community, lobbying and advocating on behalf of travellers and their mental health, developing and inputting into policy which will impact on travellers' mental health. Earlier this year, as part of its advocacy, the network organised large-scale protests outside the Dáil to mark International Human Rights Day, which succeeded in raising the profile of the organisation and bringing attention to the issues that the network seeks to address. The network seeks to promote a healthy traveller community where mental health is named, addressed, discussed, and where people are not afraid. That is an objective the committee wholeheartedly support, and the Bar of Ireland is proud to award its Human Rights Award 2022 to the National Traveller Mental Health Network. And I now call on Mark. Sorry.
Should we try to join them as well?
No.
Hold on there. 1 second.
I have to talk a little bit loud, excuse my, I have a little bit of a cold. This is a bittersweet day for people like myself and for any travellers that is in the room watching across Ireland. To get such an award for people that are dead, that actually don't have a voice, who are no longer here with us, but we will be their voice. The National Traveller Mental Health Network will be their voice. We will continue to bring about political change and to bring about a real Irish society, equality for everybody, and a better society for the next generation. We will not give up and we will continue. I'm delighted and honoured to accept the award on behalf of the National Traveller Mental Health Network. We are committed to the task of highlighting human rights, human tragedy, that's ongoing crisis of suicide in our community. The award is welcomed, recognised of our work, and it gives us some hope and courage that we need to continue. Having said all that, I have to be very honest and say I also feel uncomfortable accepting the award for the efforts that we have made to bring this human tragedy to the attention of Irish society. Efforts that we have to be very frank and admit have failed. We have continuously, as the National Traveller Mental Health Network, to seek in every part of Ireland, in the 32 counties of Ireland, we've made every effort to make Irish society aware of the injustice that we face as Indigenous people of this country, proud and dignified. We talk about the inequalities that we face and the suicide that we experience and the grave sites that we leave, where our children spend most of their time playing in graveyards due to bringing young kids as young as 10, 11, 12, young boys and girls, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters. We know that this is a continuous of injustice that we face on a daily basis, and the persecution of an individual's human rights in itself is very unfair. But we will continue to highlight this issue and we will not go away. We want to bring it is a political issue for us. We want to make it a political issue for the state in itself. We know for the last 12 years, in 2010, the All Ireland Traveller Health Study counted for 7 times higher than the national average suicide rates were. Unfortunately, we find it very difficult to get any commitment from government to actually go back and revisit that statistic, because each and every one of the travellers in this room and across Ireland, we know that has probably tripled, and this can't continue. We also have to acknowledge that there has been no official recognition of the injustice that we have faced in Irish society due to the inequalities that we face, due to the living conditions and the unacceptable way of Indigenous people of this country. We are treated, and very felt much so by our children and ourselves, sometimes, at most times of our lives, as subhuman. When we engage in civil society, we are treated as third-class citizens. How damaging and internalizing can that be to one's mental health? Also, we can just look at, for the cases in terms of a traveller accommodation, that we are actually told that we need to be ordinary and normal and be like settled people and accept social housing. To take one's identity from, you actually take a person's soul. And that is injustice in itself. Our children right now, as I speak, and I've said many times, are hanging on to stay alive. Our young women and men, fathers, brothers and sisters, continuously are hanging on. This needs political change. We will do everything in our power to bring about change, but we need allies like yourselves to help us and support us across the country to bring about this change. We can't bring this change on our own. We need a better society. Everybody talks about what a civil society looks like. What about the taxpayers, saving the taxpayers' money when it comes to travellers? We have the solutions, and we want to bring them solutions. We don't want to crib or cry about the injustice, because we have solutions. And we're solution-based in terms of the civil rights movement as the National Traveller Mental Health Network. If new research was to highlight the extent and the causes of the issues that we face, it would leave no option but to tackle the causes instead of cutting budgets. In the recession times, 80% of traveller funding was cut. And that just told a lot of things in terms of where travellers stay in terms of the political agenda, and so accepted. Despite them all, the Irish state would have to bring about tackling the causes. We know as travellers the causes of the high suicide rates, the injustice that we face in the education system, the accommodation, unemployment, access to mental health services in itself. We don't want any special treatment. What we want is to work with civil society, government departments. And to this state, right now as I speak, we're very aware, I'm very aware, and everybody in the National Traveller Mental Health Work is very aware that actually we have made the political parties very aware, the government very aware of what's happening within the traveller community. And unfortunately, we've been ignored, in my opinion, and totally ignored. And that's what we count for in terms of Irish society. That's a very powerful message sent to our children that actually they don't count. Since 2010 was the All Ireland Traveller Health Study. It's total refused to go back and revisit that statistic because it would bring shame on Irish society. I, like many others, the activists on the National Traveller Mental Health Network, do not want to bring shame to any Irish society. We want to bring a better society for everybody and in terms of equality. So I'm asking for support and pleading with everybody who is our allies here in the room and across Ireland to help us and support us to bring about real change, a change for our children so that we can keep our children alive, that we can actually bring about opportunities, real opportunities, that we can be a part of civil society. First of all, I'd like to say to anybody that is listening, we want your support. We need your support. We want to keep our kids alive, you know. The injustice that's happening to our community cannot continue. We're all carrying the burden of this. We're barely in existence in ourselves. I'd just like to say, you know, on behalf of the people again that do not have a voice, we are their voice from the grave. We will continue to be their voice from the grave. We will bring about hope and change with people like yourselves. I want to say thank you on behalf of the National Traveller Mental Health Network for this award of acknowledging the work that we have done to date. Thank you very much.
I think we're going to have a little question and answer chat session, Max. And I suppose, I think it's fair to say that if there's a lack of trust in the institutions, then the traveller community is not going to engage with it or with those institutions. So how can we help that? How can we bring that trust about?
Well, I think, you know, travellers are very prepared now to engage and have been trying to engage with the state for a long time now and raising the issue. Everybody's aware now. Most people in Irish society is aware of the issues that travellers are experiencing. You know, I just think right now what we're looking for is an ombudsman to investigate, you know, the issues that travellers is experiencing, that can bring it to a European level, that we have a national travel mental health strategy that will actually bring about a real change and look at the root causes of it. Also, I think it's really important that, you know, the piece of research that was done in 2010, that actually we revisit that piece of research and go back to really look at what's happening in Irish society to the Indigenous people of this country. Because this is our country. We're the Indigenous people of this country. This is a country that we love and that we hold on to with great pride. And each and every one of our children, when they're in sports or when they're in activity, we carry that flag with pride and rightly so. But when we're in our own soil, actually we're treated sometimes and most times as uncivilized, since we feel that we're treated as subhuman. And in most cases where we're trying to get through college and trying to get through the education system, we have to deny our own identity and deny who we are to get through that system, and knowing how we're treated in it, and to try and teach our children to play a game of chess to hide their identity, to get on, you know. And I think if you take a person's soul away from them, you actually take away their identity. So I don't think it's about us not wanting to work and the trust. I think it's about real political change and being very frank and honest what that actually looks like for the child, the woman, the man, the mother, you know, that's out there, the uncle that's trying to keep their child alive. You know, we've generations of trauma, but the trauma that we're experiencing now is way beyond, in my personal opinion and my professional opinion, is just so, like people talk about us living on the edge of Irish society. I think, you know, for me, when I can see people's bare hands are just gripping on the edges of Irish
and just
society.
coming back to your suggestion of an ombudsman for travellers, how do you think that would assist?
I think it's really, really important that we have our own, you know, an ombudsman, because, you know, if you talk about poverty and if you talk about exclusion, talk about deprivation, talk about people like yourselves that has been just hanging on to the cliffs of Irish society, I think it's really, really important that we actually have an ombudsman that is very, you know, engaging with travellers and really access that exclusion, generations of exclusion, you know, that it's specific, and it's, you know, the likes of myself and other members in the room and across Ireland, you know, would be easy to be able to access, not just access, but it's just around, you know, having that concrete evidence as well.
Okay. And
just to finish, while there's other ombudsmen there today, they do fantastic work. It's very out of reach for people that are, you know, extreme deprivation and poverty, and, you know, are barely coming out of graveyard, going from one graveyard to another and living in, really, really oppression.
I mean, you tugged my heartstrings there when you mentioned about your children and keeping your children alive. And we've just come through one pandemic, and I think you have your own pandemic, mental health pandemic.
Here we have.
Where is the travelling community at the moment in terms of accessing services and trying to, I suppose, overcome that pandemic?
I think, I have to be very honest. I'm an ally of settled community as well, and I know that the mental health services are actually not meeting the needs of settled people as well. But definitely when it comes to travellers, there's triple the barriers in terms of how do you actually engage with travellers in relation to mental health. They actually make us like zombies, or not able to deal with us at all, or not able for us to access services, or actually they don't believe that a person has psychosis or an issue. They think it's because of addiction. They're not able to analyse and put the right diagnose on the individual. But I think it's really important that I say this. We wouldn't be having the mental health issues that we're facing unless the inequalities are so deep. And that's what people think. Because they're an ethnic minority group, Indigenous people in this country, they all suffer from mental health because it's all their own fault. They don't engage with services, they don't engage with education, don't want employment. We do want all that, and we're fighting for that. But the reality is, because of all the inequalities, like you just said, and yourself said, that's the reason why we have our statistics as they are, And I think there's lots of other people that are experts in this room who are travellers and activists would be able to say what that system looks like in terms of design and whatever. But I think respect is a really important word. We talk about inclusion, empowerment, and, equality. What I always think about is respecting one's differences and respecting one's opinion. And I think, time has come, in my opinion, that it was actually, I always said it was crime in this country to be gay and lesbian. It was crime to have an abortion. Out of sight, out of mind. It was a crime what happened to the women in the laundries, put behind walls, out of sight, out of mind. That's what's been happening to my community, out of sight, out of mind, behind big walls. And I think I would love to see for this generation is a very frank, honest opportunity that we can actually, build hope, because that's what we do as community activists, is build hope. And as Indigenous people, we don't walk in straight lines. We live in circles as an Indigenous people, and we're very proud of that. And we don't want to be settled people. We're proud of the people that we are, and we're hanging on for that, and we're fighting for that, and it's like if we could be settled, everything would be perfect. And I just think that's an indictment in itself for one's message to say to our children.
And you spoke of allies and needing allies, and I suppose marginalised groups often need allies that have a louder voice to assist them with the causes that they're trying to advance. So what can we, as your ally, potentially assist with?
I think
in terms of bringing some attention, I suppose, to the causes that
I suppose that, for me, I think it's really important to have people that's in very powerful positions to be our allies and to be our champions. We see you and we hear you. Our children hear you. And just to remind yourself on a personal level and a professional level that actually you could be saving traveller children's lives. You could be saving a mother from dying, and put it in that framework. When you see the injustice, don't turn the other way, or don't say it's too far down there for me to see it, or I don't associate with them. I don't have that common ground. Injustice is injustice. We call it out for what it is, and be our allies and supporters in any arena that you actually see. Because when people like yourselves is in powerful positions that can call it out and be our allies, you will be the people that is responsible for a different Ireland. And that's what we want, is we want a real different Ireland that shift, and the inequalities that will shift for your children and our children to come. You know, I'm in my 50s now, so I won't ever
So
see
like-
that again, you know what I mean? But we want it for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Want to shape that real Ireland. Like I'm very proud to be Irish. And every St. Patrick's Day, I grew out with me green on me, and like I see all the sad people in the parades and whatever, and I think it's amazing. Everybody's delighted, even in America, across Europe, the world are delighted to be Irish. And I thought, Jesus, the price that we as travellers paid to hold on to the traditional, you know, everything that was good to be Irish. But we paid the price for that. And unfortunately, we've paid the price of carrying children to a grave, burying young men, young women, young mothers and fathers, and having nobody to look after kids. The generations of trauma and the trauma now that our children are experiencing, John Paul, Tom, and Thomas will know this, and Susie, it's worse now than it ever was because of this so much suicides, you know, constant. And I work in a local NGO, and for the last couple of years, maybe 4 times out of the month, I'm at a funeral of somebody that dies with suicide. And I had a new colleague to start with me a couple of years ago. It's just not possible you go to another funeral, you know, and it's just become normalised. And when something becomes normalised, it's actually not right, you know.
I think we've committed to in giving you the award and in recognising your work. I think we've committed to working with you throughout the year to see how we can help you and be that ally and that champion that you're asking us to be.
We very much appreciate that, and we welcome that in every way.
And I think we might wrap it up at this stage, Max.
Yeah.
I think your thoughts and your views and your insight I think is incredibly important to us to help us understand where you are sitting and where you're standing. Yeah. And it's just so I mean it's so useful to see it from your perspective. Yeah. Because we can't stand in your shoes.
No, and I'm delighted that you can't stand in these shoes, because you wouldn't like to stand in my shoes, to be honest with you, of the sorrow and the pain and the suffering. You know, we don't want to be victims either. You know, as I said, like we are proud and dignified. Yeah. I just like to invite Thomas, if that's okay, you'd like to say a couple of words.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't mind saying it.
No, come on up.
There's just a couple of things. First of all, it's a real honour to
up in here.
It's a real honour to be awarded the Human Rights Award, and you know, and also when you were naming some of the other awardees, you know, kind of it's great to be in that company. So I'd like to thank the committee for the award. A couple of things came up there. For instance, the allies and the role that allies can play. I mean, access to justice is a crucial area for travellers. And I mean, one of the areas, if you look at it, the anti-trespass legislation, which criminalises nomadism in this country and which has stopped travellers from moving, for instance, and has been looked at by different legal experts and kind of has been deemed to be unconstitutional because there's a lack of defence in it. Certainly would be one area, I think, that the legal profession could look at in terms of real support, in terms of ensuring that at least the constitutional rights in this country is upheld when it comes to travellers, which hasn't been the case in terms of treating all children of the nation equally. I think certainly as allies in that field, there's many other fields as well. When we talk about unemployment and say, for instance, market trading acts, some of the acts there, but also even in terms of taking cases against, like challenging, you know, because there's no class action in this country. Yep. And I think, you know, it's a real failing on a state, not particularly with such an excluded community, where an individual who's completely excluded from society, marginalised, disadvantaged and impoverished is expected to challenge the legal apparatus of the country when it comes to upholding the rights. I think really we need to look at what kind of a society we are when we expect an individual who has been so disadvantaged by this state is then expected to challenge the state to ensure their rights. I think we need to look at that, and how do we put in mechanisms to ensure that we can do that at least collectively.
Yeah.
You know, I think because there's no doubt about it. I mean, this this has been state sponsored, you know, from 1963. You mentioned the 1963 itinerancy report. This is state-sponsored exclusion from 1963. This is state-sponsored discrimination. This is state-sponsored oppression. And what travellers really want at this stage is an apology for the damage that this state has done. Because like all healing, and I'm a psychotherapist and I run the Traveller Counsel Service, usually healing starts with an apology.
Exactly.
It's an acknowledgement of the, you know, and just the last piece I'd say is the ombudsman for travellers, and I'd say Roma, because I think like if you look at and there's ombudsman for other groups as well, so it's not unprecedented. And if you look at the changes that the ombudsman for children, for instance, look at the changes in our society that the ombudsman for children has initiated through it, and we're not looking for favouritism, as Mag said, we're looking for fair play.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's as much, you know, I think it's okay to ask for that at this stage. But I'd like to thank the committee and the Bar Council of Ireland for this award. And I think, you know, and I look forward to working with you, you know, and indeed on behalf of the network. And the network is a very vibrant network. You know, many people couldn't get here today who wanted to be here today. You know, it's in central Dublin, it's at 4:30 in the evening. It's a bad evening. People are coming from across the country. I mean, it's not an easy place to get to, you know, and parking in Dublin, as you know, or kind of even getting in here, you know, for people who's from Dublin. But there's many people who know about the award across the network, you know, and who are kind of really appreciative of the Bar Councils. And we're holding we're marking the International Human Rights Day this year because it falls on a Saturday, so protest. We're thinking it's not the best day to hold a protest. So we're holding a seminar, and we will have a number of people speaking at that seminar, including Vincent Brown. So we are. So thank you very much.
Thomas, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.